title like Hacking Happiness at Airbnb, you might be expecting me to talk about how I exploit or manipulate the happiness of our users like some kind of genius or supervillain. And that you'll be disappointed if that's what you're expecting because, well, actually that's a good example of one of the things I'll be talking about. That's the good news. But really I'm going to be presenting two case studies. One is about how we accidentally hacked happiness in the wrong direction. And another one is how we learned about users who are hacking their own happiness, what we discovered, and what we learned from it. So if you know anything about Airbnb, the core user experience is travel. And travel is not by any means a habitual behavior. That's not to say that there aren't habits that are built into the user experience. That part of it is not one that I typically work on. But the travel experience, the offline experience, is one that's it's unusual for a tech company to have the core user experience be interpersonal, offline, and unobserved to the platform. And that's a uniquely, it's a very human experience, and that's what it has in common with habitual behavior. But the individuality that humans bring to that travel experience is one that's really hard to unpack. It's hard to make sense of all that individuality. And the temptation is then to discard it, to view users as being all the same, because the things that they bring are so unique. And what I do as a behavioral scientist is to try to make sense of those things, to try to understand and categorize them. And so we're going to do that by going through these two case studies and talk about the things that users, what they have in common, that they bring to their experience of your product. For lack of a better word, the baggage that they bring to the experience. And the first type of baggage we're going to talk about is habits that you had no role in creating, the old habits that they're bringing with them. And that's covered in case study one. And the second thing is expectations around what they're going to get out of using your product. And you may have had something to do with forming those expectations, you may not. But it's important to understand where they came from. So let's jump into, am I doing this right? Case study, yeah, so case study one. I've titled this, What Happens When You Make Users Jump Through Hoops? And this is about what happened when we moved our phone number from one part of the web page to another. And so let me give some context for this. Airbnb is a company that is growing very fast. It's a good problem to have. But it's hard to scale in some areas to keep up with the user growth. And one of the areas that absolutely has to scale at the same rate as user growth is customer service, is customer care. And it's imperative that it scale at the same rate as user growth to maintain a level of quality. That's hard to do. That strains resources if you can't do it as fast. And so, particularly when it comes to phone support, one of the ways that you can meet the demand in a time that's when it's hard to scale as fast as the users are coming at you, is to help users who don't really need to talk to someone to find the answers to their questions on their own. And so what you can do is put the information, try to gather the information that the average user who doesn't need to talk to someone is going to need, and you can put it in front of the phone number. And you may have been subject to this sort of treatment at one time or another, and you may have varying opinions about how much you like that. But it can be useful. And that's what we did. Starting in June of 2013, we changed the help flow to help users who didn't really need to talk to someone to find the answers to their questions. And so I'm just going to walk you through the old user flow and then show you the new one. And then show you the lesson that we learned from that. So the old user flow was called 24/7 customer support. So this is the landing page of Airbnb. And if I have an issue and I need help, I see help at the top right corner of the page. I click that, and at the top of it, of the drop-down menu that appears, it says 24/7 customer support. So I click that. I'm taken to this help page, and there's a window right there in front. There's a help center menu on the left, but I see the phone number. That's the first thing I see when I click into the help center, and there's the number. I call it. Easy. It's too easy, in fact, because I ignored the part that said, we try to keep the phone lines open for guests and hosts with urgent situations. Please reach out to us via email if possible. I skipped over that. I know what a phone number looks like, and I want to talk to somebody. So for people like me, we have a new user flow that may help me find the answer to my question, perhaps faster. If I have an urgent situation, just try to imagine what this might feel like. Now I click Help, and at the top of the drop-down menu, it now says Visit the Help Center. And so I click that, and I am shown a similar Help Center menu, but I don't have the phone number right in front of me, but I do notice on the bottom left a button that says Contact Airbnb. Contact Airbnb, and then on the right side of the screen, this menu appears. It says, help us help you faster. Accurately selecting your specific issue from the drop-down list will enable us to direct your question to the right department. Okay, what is your issue about? Well, this is about a reservation. Select a reservation, okay. There's one, and what can we help you with? I have an issue with a host. Listing is not as described. Okay, have you talked to your host? Yes. We're here to support you. Okay. I still need help. Okay, how did you communicate with your host? And what did they say? This is not bad, by the way. What is the complaint? Select one. Okay, please describe your issue. How do you feel right now? Angry. I feel angry. Okay, urgent. I see the button that says urgent. I click that, and I am rescued by I'm given the phone number. So I should say that it doesn't always look this way. If you've never used Airbnb, if you're on a trip, the phone number is more accessible. So those with if I have a truly urgent situation, like I'm locked out of my listing, I can't find my host, I can't find the listing, it's much easier to get to that phone number. So we definitely want to be accessible for those with truly urgent situations. Those who don't have an urgent situation, they actually do find the information that they need more quickly than if they called us. The part that we didn't anticipate were people who were not in, as we define it, a truly urgent situation, so they weren't on a trip, but it felt urgent. It felt stressful. And this is where the old habits come in. This help center is not, it should not be, if we're doing our jobs, habitual. You shouldn't be, unless it's just the whole system is really cryptic. So people are visiting this infrequently. So the old habits are old habits of communication. Their old habits have nothing to, it's not the old flow. The problem is, if you're in a situation that feels stressful, your brain is not in a state to learn new tricks. Jumping through hoops feels more difficult the more stressed you are. And the familiar behavior, the well-carved ruts of habit that may not relate to getting help on Airbnb, but more generally relate to I want to be heard, start to become the alternative. And they become an alternative to a relatively high bar of learning a new trick. So who might this affect? Someone who is in an emotionally agitated state, but is not in a truly urgent situation? That it might include people who are kind of pissed off. And what does that mean for us? What are the old habits of communication? What do you resort to when you want to be heard and you're angry and you don't have time to jump through new hoops? What was that? Yeah, so around this time, our social media team started going, wow, people are really pissed off on Facebook and Twitter. So, I skipped a slide, sorry. So don't read these. But these are some comments on Facebook that don't take a picture of them either. These are some Facebook comments that I grabbed the other day, and you know, a lot of there are. I mean, this is public. There's more where this came from. Hello, it's impossible to read. I'm reading from the top right. It's impossible to reach you through your platform or by mail. It's now more than 3 weeks, so this is not on a trip. Similarly, on Twitter, you could look at our Twitter feed, and a quick search turns up things like in the top right. It seems to have gotten really difficult to contact you guys with an issue. If you Google Airbnb reviews, the first result at the top of the page is from a third-party company called Trustpilot. And this is not an accident. They've worked very hard to be in this position. And so you can see that rating is not super. And wanting to be heard is an itch that can be scratched with this page, because I can go from the page you see here to posting a review in 3 clicks. And if you looked at the Trustpilot reviews, I mean, that's that 2 out of 5 stars that you see there isn't great, but it's not representative of people's opinion of Airbnb if you look in other places. And if you look at the reviews that are there, the composition of those reviews starts to change around the summer of 2013. A lot of they look pretty good before June, July 2013, and afterwards, there's a lot of people that are pissed off that want to be heard. And so, how does this relate to you? As someone who is thinking about helping users learn a new habit, other people are doing the same thing. Other people have done the same thing. And even if your product is a new thing, a new service, a new way to get something done, you can bet that there already exist other habits that, however imperfect, are substitutes for the ones that you want to create. And the higher the bar, the more difficult it is to jump through the hoop of learning the new habit, the more tempting the old one's going to become. And so, think about the implications of that. And this is where I skip over the part where I tell you how to fix it, and we're going to talk about the next case study. So this next one, which I've called sabotaging the reward. This is about what the baggage that users bring to their experience of the reward component of the hooked model. But first, I have to lay out an economic model, which is a terrible thing to say in front of a crowd like this, but bear with me, it won't hurt that much. So This model is, was introduced by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky starting in 1979, a model that they called prospect theory, often called reference-dependent preferences. It's sort of the special relativity of behavioral economics. It's like one of the seminal models. And it captures the fact that the way that we experience changes to our state of affairs, or the way that we evaluate a perspective change, is dependent on a reference point. It depends on where we are, it depends on our status quo, and how we evaluate. We're more sensitive to changes from the status quo, and that in a sense matters more than the absolute state. So this is a really simple graph of this model. I don't think they used a happy face in their original paper. But on the vertical axis, we have happiness or value. And on the horizontal axis is essentially the state, is the sort of the value of the goods or the situation or whatever it might be. And they are coded as gains when they deviate to the right from the reference point, and losses when they deviate to the left. And the blue line is known as the value function. So it maps the state change to the value. And an important feature is that the value function is steeper on the loss side than the gain side. And that captures the fact that we tend to be more sensitive to losses than we are to equivalent size gains. So imagine that if someone offered you a salary of $100,000, that could be a gain or a loss, depending on what you're making now. I guess a better example might be if you have kids. Well, imagine that they're playing in the living room. If you don't have kids, imagine that you have them playing in the living room. You go into the living room and you say, "Hey kids, who wants some ice cream?" And then a few seconds later say, "Oh wait, I forgot. I have to cut the grass or something. We can't go get ice cream." The kids won't go back to playing. They're essentially in the same situation they were 20 seconds ago, but they're not. They feel very differently. So when you told them, hey, who wants ice cream? They went to, from where they were, they evaluated the ice cream as a gain. So they moved, their state essentially moved up the gain curve to a new spot. And then they incorporated that state of, we're about to eat ice cream, into their endowment, economists call it sometimes. They absorbed that information, and that quickly became the new reference point. So then when you dashed that expectation moments later, they didn't slide back down the gain curve. It was now coded as a loss. And so the new state of affairs is one of less happiness than where they were before. Now, astute observers might realize that the kids didn't actually get any ice cream. So I talked about the $100,000 offer as coded as a gain or loss relative to what you're making now. They were not eating ice cream, and yet it was still coded as a loss. And so the insight is it doesn't have to be, it's not just the status quo that is evaluated or that's considered as the reference point. It can be expectations about what our status quo will be at the time relevant to the reference point. And this is an insight that Botan Kosegi and Matthew Rabin had in a paper called A Model of Reference-Dependent Preferences in 2006, where they extended Kahneman and Tversky's model to incorporate expectations into the reference point. And this is where you come in as a product person, product designer, manager, developer, or whatever it may be, the reward isn't purely the reward. It's essentially the reward. It's the payout. It's the value of the reward itself minus whatever expectations they're coming in to that experience with. So, for instance, is this a rewarding burger? It might be very tasty, and you always get the sort of what we call the consumption utility, which is another, like, this is why economists have a bad reputation. We say things like consumption utility, but you get the burger itself, but that's not the only reward. It's also the gain-loss factor is weighed relative to what you were expecting, and if you're expecting this burger, it might be kind of a letdown. So let's take this to the actual case study. That was sort of your economics lesson for the day. Consider 2 trips. So this is inspired by some research that I did trying to understand what goes into a guest rating of the trip experience. And so this is sort of an anecdote that reflects one of the things that I found. 2 trips that are alike in every conceivable, observable feature. Same number of guests from the same place to the same place, the same type of listing, the same quality of experience, the same everything, even the same weather. And yet, one receives a 4-star rating, the other receives a 5-star rating. What's the difference? Well, if you picked up on the fact that I'm showing you the weather, and that's not arbitrary, weather is one of the few things that we can know a guest's experience of, and that's hard enough, but we can also know what they expected, and that's really hard. And so a 60-degree day on a trip there's the objective experience of it, and then there's a sense in which it could be a gain or a loss depending on what you're expecting. 60 degrees isn't bad. It's not great. But if you were expecting 50 degrees, you might be pleasantly surprised. If you're expecting 70, you might be frustrated that you didn't bring a jacket, and you should have. And that's the key. That's the difference between these two trips. The trip 2, the 30-year normal for that day was 50 degrees, and so the 60 degrees was coded as a gain. Trip 1, it was a loss. So the takeaway here is that expectations matter, and you need to understand where they come from. They might come from you in the sense that if you're providing the picture of the Big Mac that's better than the experience, you might be setting them up for disappointment in the reward phase. They might be coming from something that you have no control over, like weather, in the short run anyway. You have no control over it. But it's important to understand where the expectations came from, because users don't experience that reward in isolation. And that's sort of the thread that ties these things together, and ties together a lot of the projects that I work on. Your users are people. They're not blank slates. But we tend to, it's easy when it's difficult to understand them to think of them as blank slates. But they're not. And they bring with them baggage. And you may not be able to understand them as people, but their baggage looks more similar to each other's baggage than they look to one another. And so those are the kinds of things you can sort of parse out to understand the kind of humanness of the experience, and that has a big impact on components of the habit cycle. So that's the end of my prepared comments. I have a couple of minutes for questions.
What did you do with the data once you understood the impact of expectation of weather on reviews? And what did you do in the product? Or is there any change?
Well, I didn't do anything with the data, but yes, the point, I guess, of this finding, this wasn't like I'm simplifying the research here, and so it was part of a bigger project of understanding how users sort of evaluate the whole experience, and this was one way to get at to what extent do expectations matter. There were lots of other things that pointed to that. So this is like a clear pointer to the fact that expectations matter, but it's one that we can't do anything about. But it happens to be a pretty cute story. So the things that we worked on were really other ways that users bring expectations in. And this is pretty new research. So I can't point to like a feature, but you may see one at some point that was inspired by that. I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that after the August rehaul of customer support, you guys had lower reviews, but people were able to find information more efficiently, and you probably lowered your kind of like customer support debt. So would you guys count that as a net win, or?
Well, I guess I should clarify that this is sort of a story about what happened with social media contacts, and I can't, like I said, I'm making this up. I can't point to those changes as like being definitively driven by the change that we made, but we're always improving, especially with customer support. We're always improving those features. I don't know it's not my department really. I don't know if they would count it as a net win, but I don't know if they think of it that way. I think they think of it as, we're always pivoting toward the thing that we think will improve the quality of the service. And so learning about what happens and learning how users respond to it can make anything, I guess, a net win. I'm not trying to sort of duck the question. I just don't. None of the conversations I've had about this really describe it in those terms, I guess, because we're always changing the product. Yeah.
Those were great case studies. So I'm intrigued by what does behavioral economists do 9 to 5 at an Airbnb every day?
Next question. Sometimes I come home and I ask myself the same question. It's not because I'm not doing anything; it's because I'm doing a lot of things. I mean, because just about everything that we're involved in has something to do with user psychology, and it has something to do with this offline experience that we can't observe. But we also, I work with data scientists, I work with analysts, I work with product designers, I work with operations managers, I work with all kinds of people and try to help in lots of different ways. But I primarily am focused on providing the product team with design research to understand what pain points are and how we can improve, how designers can improve the product to make it more enjoyable to use, easier to use, and give users overall a better experience. And so that I'm usually, have like my hands in half a dozen projects at once. It's really, it's hard to answer, but yeah, I hope that helps.
Sure. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you.